Welcome to Quora Anonymous. If this is your first time and you like the video, please like and subscribe. If you would like to read along, turn on closed captioning with the 3 dots in the upper right corner. Now, let's begin. Have you ever done something truly immoral that you nonetheless are deeply satisfied with? I fucked my best friend's wife. I have been best friends with this man my entire life. He is still closer to me than any family member. Somehow, out of the blue, he landed a lingerie model for a wife. I couldn't understand, since he was so incredibly inept when it came to women. Nevertheless, he won the big prize. But after 7 years of marriage, they were on the rocks for reasons that were none of my business, and that I wouldn't learn of until much later. One night they had invited me to dinner at their house, and afterwards we were sipping cocktails in the living room and the talk turned to favorite movies. This was in the time of VCR tapes, before DVD or other technology, and it was a big deal to have a tape library. They spoke of a movie they loved, something I had never heard of and now forget, and offered to lend it to me. I shrugged and agreed to watch it, and at that moment their infant upstairs began to cry. The couple looked at each other. The infant was their last gasp at finding something to keep the marriage together. It's always a mistake to bring a child into the world as a talisman against divorce. My friend caved first. "I'll go check on her," he said. "She probably needs changing." "You get in the movie." And he got up to go upstairs. His wife and I went down to the TV room in the finished basement to find the movie. I was standing behind her, while she stood in front of a bookshelf of videotapes. I was looking at her body, not the tapes. Rarely had I contemplated any kind of adverse action with her. She was off limits, and it was never an issue. But now, even after 7 years of marriage and a child, her former model body was still lithe and tight, and tonight she was wearing a gauzy blouse with lacy cuts at the midriff that showed her belly. And then she reached up to get the movie from the top shelf. Without thinking, my hands went around her top and I cupped her breasts and began to fondle them. My ears were burning with shame, and I suddenly felt pent-up lust, humiliation, anticipation, and the expectation of a slap and angry words. But all she said was, "Oh," as I massaged her breasts from behind. I could feel her nipples hardening in her bra. And then she found the movie she wanted on the top shelf and pulled it down. She turned with the movie and I noticed her eyes were unfocused and dazed. She put the movie on a small table and whispered, "Hurry," and walked over to the lounger in front of the TV. She undid her jeans and pushed them down and leaned down on the arm of the lounger. "Hurry," she whispered in a husky voice, more insistently. Now my heart was racing. I could still turn and run up the stairs, but I didn't. Without thinking, I undid my belt and pulled my pants down and found myself ready. I saw her perfect naked ass raised for me, her head down on her arms, her hair obscuring her face. I took advantage. It was quick. The excitement, the anticipation, the unexpected lust, the danger all contributed to make it incredibly satisfying, as were her soft grunts. She pulled her jeans up over the wetness, ignoring it. I pulled myself together. The entire episode hadn't taken 3 minutes, I would guess. She grabbed the VCR tape and bounded up the stairs and I followed. When my friend came downstairs, the tape was on the coffee table. He went to the kitchen sink to wash his hands and the conversation picked up where it left off. There were no significant glances between his wife and myself, but I felt evil, dirty, guilty, and like a conspirator. I never had any secrets with my friend before. He even knew my PIN. Now this was a huge wedge. When I drove home that night, all I could think of was what I had done. It was so wrong, and yet it felt so fucking good the entire short time. I had rarely felt so fully satisfied. It was all I could think of for the next few days. And then, out of the blue, she called me. "We have to talk," he said to me, and I didn't have to ask what about. We agreed to meet at a coffee place near her house. As I drove to the coffee shop, my heart was in my throat, thinking she was going to say, "I'm pregnant," though I knew it was too soon for her to know. When I got there, she was sitting at a table with coffee for both of us. I sat down in silence. It was awkward as hell. "I've never done anything like that before," was the first thing she said. She didn't need to explain, I knew what she meant. I said nothing. "That was incredibly wrong of you," she said, "of us." I felt like shit. She put her hand on mine to make a point and leaned over. I stretched out with my finger and stroked her breast. She looked me in the eyes and pursed her lips. Then she grabbed my hand and dragged me out of the shop to her car, where we fucked in the parking lot of Starbucks. After it was over, clothes askew, panting, she just said, "We are getting a divorce." Many years later I still feel badly about what I did. But as their marriage disintegrated into a vicious and acrimonious divorce, I was engaged in the most satisfying sexual adventure of my life. It lasted for 2 years, always in secret. No one knew, I think. At least, it never got back to me. Many years later, when we would meet by chance at a party or event, she would look me in the eye and we would sneak off to a hotel or to her car for a quickie and then return. It didn't even matter if she or I were with some other partner. We had the chemistry. It was wrong, so incredibly unforgivably wrong on every level. And I don't regret one precious second of it. Eventually she moved far away. We haven't seen each other in years. Sorry to go anonymous on this, but I knowingly committed a federal crime. I had a landlord many years ago that stiffed me my security deposit with trumped up nonsense, despite the fact I left the place better than when he rented it to me. I had spent thousands upgrading the place and buying a new air conditioner to replace the previous one he refused to fix/replace. Due to medical problems, my family was badly strapped for cash at the time too, making this particularly egregious. I was working 80+ hours per week and didn't have the time to take him to court and feared he'd pull something anyway. He was rich and well connected. I happened to know 2 things about him though that I knew would help me at least get revenge. I knew he was going on a vacation a few weeks later in Bermuda with his stunning new girlfriend he wanted to impress, and that he was totally reliant on credit cards and never took cash anywhere. Shortly after I knew he left for Bermuda, I called Discover, MasterCard, Visa, and American Express each from a payphone and told them in a fake voice that I was him and that I'd lost my wallet with all my ID and credit cards and didn't remember all the cards I had or which banks issued them. I told them I would not be home for a week and had no access to the information. I requested that they all be cancelled and new ones sent to his home. About a week after he returned from Bermuda, I stopped at his home to demand return of my security deposit again and again. He refused. Then I asked him how he enjoyed his vacation without credit cards. His face froze and turned white. Then I said in a sarcastic tone, "How awful, I hope that never happens again." Then I turned my back to him as I went back to my car. As I did, he plaintively kept repeating "wait" in a feeble tone. I could tell I heard him. He called me at work 2 times the next morning, but I told my secretary to tell him I was unavailable and to take a message both times. In his messages he relayed that he was sorry and wanted to work things out. The 3rd time he called, I took it, after instructing my secretary to keep him on hold a few minutes. He kept apologizing and rambling, saying we had a misunderstanding and wondered how I was able to get all his cards cancelled and that it completely ruined his trip and cost him his new girlfriend. I just listened with a grin on my face. After he finally paused his rambling, I interjected, "I'm very busy and have no time to chat. If you want to settle things to my satisfaction, send me my $2,000 deposit back plus the $530 I paid for the air conditioner." He said, "I will gladly send you back your deposit, but you know I never agreed to pay for the air conditioner." I replied, "I know that, and if you'd simply repaid me the security deposit back as you were originally supposed to, I wouldn't be demanding anything else. Now I have to go back to work." Then I hung up on him. He had his secretary drive over to my office the same day to hand over a check for $2,530. It wasn't the money that felt so good, but the revenge. I've never regretted it, and I feel proud to have done it, despite having committed a felony. I worked in it in one of the world's largest banks. Sadly, that meant that women were a very rare sight. One day I arrived at work to see the most beautiful blonde babe in a tie skirt standing at the photocopier. I couldn't take my eyes off her. When she turned and saw me, she smiled, a dazzling smile, and I saw her clear blue eyes sparkling in her perfect face above the most tempting large chest that threatened to burst through her bulging blouse. Even her accent was a league above anyone else, and straight from Oxbridge. So, being I started to chat with her. When I walked into the glass-windowed side office, my ass-hen-faced boss asked me what I thought I was doing. Speaking to that gorgeous lady, I said, "Do you know who that is?" "Nope." "It's XXXXXXXXX." So. Awkward silence. Then one of my team members piped up. "She's about as senior as you can get in this bank. She's boss's boss or higher. She bloody gorgeous, that's what she is." Silly buggers had just given me her name. So I emailed her. There was chemistry between us from the start, but we also became very close as people. It turned out that she was married. Of course she was. And she was indeed Oxbridge. One of the top of the academic tree, and she was at the very top of that tree, having been invited back 3 years in a row to present her work and speak to new undergraduates. Her husband was a mega high-earning consultant specialist in a very rare mathematical field, earning triple her massive salary. They had a huge house, expensive cars, expensive suits, and a completely loveless marriage. It was a marriage engineered by ambitious parents who had almost complete control over her. Her father, in senior international politics, had arranged for his virgin, busty, highly educated blonde babe of a daughter to be in a tiny bikini in a hot tub, knowing what she had to do when one of the senior political figures joined her for the evening. She was available and eager for anything he cared for, and of course dropped in the matter of her virginity, which the politician desired and which was to be no more by the end of the evening. So the politician had her, then her beautiful young body was on display as a deflowered prize for others who arrived, after which she thanked him and left, having done her duty. The political expediency secured for her father by her virginity, she was then told that as soiled goods she needed to secure the best option available. This turned out to be the husband chosen for her. She met him on a weekend road trip arranged for them by the parents. Her newly deflowered status to one of the most powerful men in the land, told to the husband, to be both as a measure of how desirable she was, but also the fact that she was now available for bedding. Eager to not disappoint, she ensured that the car trip was a memory of a lifetime for him, and he wasted no time rushing her to the hotel room when they arrived. He thoroughly consummated the deal that weekend, and when he returned to her home, the pressure was now on him to uphold his duties and marry her. Frankly, was an academic maths nerd's wet dream, so marrying her was the easiest decision in the world. However, marriage isn't the credits rolling and everyone goes home. Quickly he started to abuse his prized possession. He became suspicious of anyone and everyone. Part of his ever more paranoid controlling of her was that she needed to be the wet slut lying naked for him on the bed whenever he arrived home. His hours in his high-pressured job were variable, but if she wasn't ready and very eager, he became more paranoid. That led to his forcing her, hurting her. Her stellar rise in her own career also placed pressure on her availability. Increasingly she had to work late, and that fueled the problems at home, the suspicions, the anger, the increasing violence. I was the only person she had ever confided in. The only one who knew what happened behind the scenes in her perfect life. Her perfect face with her perfect clothing, and her perfect body with her perfect language and her perfect career. Yet on the occasions that her guard slipped, for a few fleeting seconds I saw the haunted look of a scared, hunted animal in the headlights. Her trust was hard won, but I won it. As I learned more about the abuse that she had suffered, and the abuse that she was going through, I became more angry. Then one day, I simply told her that she was taking me to her house. She was terrified, but she did it. She made sure that her husband was working late. I took her up to their bedroom, then I kissed her. She willingly let me discover that she was very wet, So I pushed up her skirt before she could think, pulled down her knickers. I lay her back her bed and she looked at me quizzically, uncertain, but her legs remained apart. She objected, saying we shouldn't do it on this bed, but I told her that I was giving her back herself and her dignity as I undid my trousers. Then before she could object anymore, I simply rammed myself in hard and deep in one simple, decisive definitive thrust. It made her gasp, she wriggled, she tried to get away, but I held her tightly, and I thrust a few more times hard and definitively, changing everything for her decisively and absolutely. It was as if a light suddenly switched on. Suddenly her fingers were clawing painfully into my back, she was gasping, she was arching, she was begging for more, harder, faster. Suddenly she knew, she understood, and she wanted it so badly. I fucked her brains out on her husband's bed. She may not have been a virgin, but she had never had real sex. She had never experienced sex for herself. That afternoon she lost her virginity for the first time. She was moaning, she was crying, she was laughing, she was purring, she was screaming, and then she became terrified out of her wits, and scrabbled away from me like a frightened animal, because suddenly she was having an orgasm for the very first time. And what an orgasm it was. I thought that she had injured herself. I went down on her as her first time, I fingered her in proper foreplay for her pleasure for her first time. She became like putty in my hands. She gave a willing blowjob for the first time, wanting it to be the best that I had ever had, pushing herself above and beyond and trying ever more and better. She lay happily naked in sheer bliss, and for the first time ever, I saw the real her shining through. She was like an angel. The most beautiful woman I had ever seen. Smiling, happy, tears of joy. Relaxed. That day changed everything for her. She found out that she was a person. She could make her own choices. She could feel pleasure for herself. She could break the rules and take control of her life. She divorced him, and during the divorce, found out that he had been unfaithful to her with another woman at his work for over a year. She would drive over to my place simply for a booty call. She let me give her organisms in one of London's busiest railway stations in the middle of a crowded platform in rush hour. I pleasured her for the entire duration of a theatre production in one of London's poshest theatres, her orgasm timing with the final dose. She gave me a long great blowjob at our seats during an international flight. We spent a weekend in Amsterdam, and never left our room having solid sex from arrival, until our frantic packing for departure 2 days later, going out just to eat, and to see a sex show where she was invited on stage. We went away for a weekend in Scotland, and had sex the entire weekend with her posing for naked photographs. We visited my parents, and went on a car trip, and she blew me in the back of the car, while they were driving. She burst out of her demure dresses into tiny, bulging bikinis, and her hair hung freely down, no longer tied tightly under control. Her new freedoms she celebrated sexually, flirting with anything in trousers, and wanting to have them all. She loved nothing better than to be the rose amongst many thorns on the dancer floor, in the pub, or at the clubs. When a senior colleague in the bank, whom she could trust with discretion, flew into the country, his years of lusting after her were definitely rewarded. She knew what he wanted and wasted no time simply fetching him from the airport and taking him home, much to his confusion. Minutes later she was giving him the time of his life. She didn't even fancy him, she simply loved being the one making the choices, being in control, and being able to use her body on her terms at her discretion and no one else's. I got lost in the crowd, and so my time with her ended, and work took me far away. But she was always firmly available. If I ever wanted her, we have remained close friends. She would send me pictures of herself, if I asked for them. Now, many years later, she's entirely her own person. She had her own house. She retired very young, having made her fortune. She's a good friend, a confident woman, and still one of the most beautiful and intelligent ladies walking the planet today. She's very clear that she chooses freely as a friend to be available for me if ever I want it. She offers nothing more than physical satisfaction, as she never wants to be married or in a relationship again. She is very definitely her own boss in her own house on her own terms, and only those invited may enter therein. Many will judge me badly for what I did. I have no regrets at all. I would do it all again. I broke her chains, and my beautiful, amazing, wonderful, sensitive, funny, intelligent, confident, and happy friend is free. I knew that things had worked out well when one day she said to me, "You do realize that a woman is like tiles, lay them well, and you can walk all over them. And you can even leave your shoes on." I've done a lot of immoral things in life that I'm satisfied with, as I truly believe that, in many cases, an immoral act can prevent many other immoral acts. One jumps to mind from high school. I had a friend who we'll call Deb. Deb was a very unfortunate girl who came from a terribly abusive home. I can't tell you how many times I would see her at school, or when we were hanging out where she had obvious signs, black eyes, bruises, etc. Some days she seriously looked shell-shocked while we were waiting for the bus. I met her father on a handful of occasions, and he terrified me. He was a rather large ex-biker that guzzled alcohol and did a lot of drugs. It was a recipe for disaster. There was also always a suspicion that her father did other things to her, far less visible. Of course, the frequent side effect of coming from such a home was the need for male acceptance and validation, so she was a tad promiscuous for a 14-year-old. When we went to parties, she generally would disappear at least once during the night. One day, I found her more sullen than usual at the bus stop, and after school, my friend Scott and I pulled her aside and asked her if she was okay. "I'm sure you've already connected the dots. She was pregnant." I don't even want to know where her state of mind was. I can't even possibly conceive the horrors she was imagining. Not only did she not know who the father was, possibly not even knowing if it was her own father, but she was now faced with the inevitable punishment from her father, along with a forced abortion. There's a limit to what empathy can do to put yourself in somebody else's shoes. So, I did what I do. We mobilized. There was no way we could let her father know she was pregnant, and, knowing the end result was going to be an abortion anyway, we knew what had to happen. I freely admit to not being a saint in my youth. Scott and I knew a guy who made damn good fake IDs, and we also knew a few adult men who were drug addicts. We had a few long nights gathering items that could be sold to pawn shops, car stereos, radar detectors, and a pistol, and sold enough to get the funds together. It was seriously a lot of crap. Area pawn shops knew us, but also could tell when we were desperate and took advantage, paying us about 50% of what they normally did. The ID cost $50, the meth cost a little more, but we had a guy who would go in and tell the clinic that he was Deb's dad, presenting ID. We'd also collected the funds to pay for the procedure. I crossed several moral boundaries during that 2-week period, but I can say, without hesitation, we did the right thing. Epilogue: I lost touch with Deb many years ago. The last time I saw and talked to her, she was working the counter at a fast food restaurant after dropping out of high school. She smoked, drank, and would do any drug put in front of her, and she would do anything to get it. I had to accept a long time ago that I can't save everybody every time. But I at least saved her that one time. I got revenge on my brother by sleeping with his girlfriend 3 times. Growing up, my father was never really around, which kind of made my oldest brother the man of the house. He is 4 years older than me. He abused his power and strength that he had over me and bullied me throughout my childhood, and it made me absolutely hate him to my core. The thing that he did that affected me the most is probably how much he hit me. Anytime we would walk past each other, anytime he saw me in public, basically every chance he got, he would hit me. I never fought back, which I truly regret. My brother had been dating this girl for about 2 years, and she was always over at our apartment and just always around. I never in sense looked at her in a sexual way. I was quite shy, and though I was a teenager, in my mind, she was completely off limits. We never even really talked much or hung out, even though she was always around. So, one day, my friend and I were supposed to do some fun activity, getting drunk and partying outside, and my brother's girlfriend and her friend wanted to come along. We ended up getting some ecstasy at this party and we didn't have much, so we were splitting capsules open and pouring it in our hand to split it up. I have it all on my hand and she goes first with her tongue. She got almost everything that was there. She had a few drinks before, but I'm pretty sure she did this on purpose, because as soon as she did it, she told me to get it off of her tongue. I still never had a sexual thought about her even with the alcohol and drugs in my system. During the party, she was staying rather close to me, which I'll let happen, because I was comfortable being around her. I told her I was tired and coming down from the ecstasy, and that I wanted to go take a nap in the room in the back. I went lay down next to a girl who was already passed out on the bed, and my brother's girlfriend is following behind me telling me she wants to take a nap also. So being 3 people in the bed, there isn't much room and she pretty much just gets on top of me. This is when I started getting sexual thoughts, and next thing I know we are making out with each other. Then clothes started coming off and my god, she had the nicest tits I have ever seen. They were huge and perky with little hard nipples pointing straight at me like daggers. I couldn't help but bury my face in them. Next thing I know, she has worked her way down to my penis and has begun giving me some of the most outrageous head I have ever received. I'm not bragging, but I'm large down there and my goodness, she had it going down her throat like it was water. After a bit of her sucking me, she took off her thong and started riding me. I pulled her down and wrapped my arms around her with my hands pulling on her hair and started pounding away. Meanwhile, the girl that passed out on the bed before we came in is being shaken with every stroke. It was quite funny to look over and see that. Well, eventually that girl woke up and we kind of just put the blanket on top of us trying to cover up, but I stayed inside her and she stayed on top of me. When the girl that was in the bed with us realized what happened, my brother's girlfriend got off of me and began dressing as we laughed it off. I stayed in bed but ass naked. I have always maintained my body and physique and am confident being naked, and I don't think they minded at all. So after that, I went home and thought that it was just a one-time thing. She messages me later that night and invites me to hang out with her and my brother's friends. This was getting weird, and I told her no, and what happened today cannot be spoken about or happen again. She agreed. Well, I still had vivid images of her perfect ass and tits in my head, and as things would go, I would get drunk some nights and message her, or she would invite me over. We met and fucked a total of 3 times. Every time was fucking great. She was amazing in bed. I was pretty awkward with her and uncomfortable until we actually started having sex. I used to take Xanax bars and have a few beers before I would go and see her just to relax. Well, I ended up having an accident and had to stay with my brother for about 3 months. The whole time I was there, she would stop by. Talk about fucking awkward. I felt awful about the whole situation honestly, and I thought she was really evil. I ended up having severe anxiety attacks over this and wanted to run away from all my problems. I got a job overseas making almost no money at all. It turns out that this was one of the best decisions I ever made. I ended up making really good money and eventually meeting the love of my life. I still live overseas with my wife and still make really good money. I have learned that everything happens for a reason, and even if it's something bad, there is a reason for it. If it wasn't for doing this immoral thing, I would have never experienced this wonderful life I have, and I never would have met the love of my life. That to me is truly satisfying. Thanks for reading, guys. I've never admitted this to anyone in such detail. My brother found out about it, and our relationship has never been the same. He never treated me like a brother anyway. Life goes on and everyone dies. Live while you still can and regret nothing. As a high school band geek, we were targeted by the jocks who would bully and torture the best of us. One night before graduation, a group of us were leaving the local pizza dive, which was located at a large strip mall, and saw the jock motorcade pulling in, gunning their engines, yelling obscenities and just being their usual dickish selves. The king jock was leading the procession in his Dodge Charger, and the whole group, about 10 of them, went into the same pizza joint we just left. Seeing all their cars parked together, I had an idea. I went into the supermarket and bought a 1-pound bag of sugar. Out in front of the store, I opened the sugar and poured about half the bag into the trash. I went out to King Jock's car and removed his gas cap, placed it on the roof so he would see it when he got back to his car. I pulled a heaping handful of sugar out of the bag and dumped it on the ground next to his car, then left the bag sitting on his trunk. A friend told me he saw the jock's car towed away on a flatbed that night. I wish I could have been there when the mechanic told him there wasn't a speck of sugar in his gas tank. I'm not really proud of this at all, but here goes. It was 12th grade biology, and we had to go to our lab to check out and perform experiments. We had to do this once a week for the whole year, and at the end of the year, we send it to the school board so that they can examine it and grade it. I'd like to inform you that the grades you get in 12th grade in India pretty much determine where you'll go to college, or even if you get in somewhere half good. I'm not saying your grades in high school are important, I'm saying your grades in the 12th grade are important. Anyway, we are approaching the end of the school year, and our biology teacher asked us to submit all lab notebooks, complete with a year's worth of work. However, I had been using biology lab as my much needed be distracted time. I hadn't done a single report. There were around 30 of them, each with complex diagrams and in-depth write-ups. Each one would take me an hour easy. I realized I hadn't done the work when our teacher asked us to hand in our notebooks, but I decided to just not hand it in, go home, finish it, and pretend that I forgot to hand it in last time. Alas, I was young and a wanderer. I went home, opened my lab notebook, looked at it, and spent the next 7 hours playing video games. It was the childhood equivalent of getting drunk and ignoring your problems. What's worse? The hangover is realizing you didn't do anything you had complete, and the day of judgment is nigh. I get to school, and halfway through the day biology class comes along. Our teacher starts approaching everyone who hadn't yet turned in their assignments. She starts naming people one at a time, and out come the lame excuses. Some forgot, some had family emergencies, while others just broke down and tried to apologize. Our biology teacher was a tough lady. No one before me got it easy, they all faced punishment, each more severe than the last. Some had to do all the work 3 times over, others had to do it 5 times. My heart begins to race as she goes down the list of names, interrogating each student along the way. There it is. Advait. Where is your work, my dear? In that moment, I made an interesting decision. I took the conversation I had not prepared for at all. I gave it to you, ma'am. I remember clearly. I turned it in first, and it was on the bottom of the pile. This did not please her. You think I'm a fool? I have worked at this school for 16 years, and not once have I lost a notebook. That excuse has never, and will never work on me. In that moment I should have given up hope and confessed. But again, I did something rather interesting. What? You lost my notebook? I worked for so many hours on that. Ma'am, how could you do that? They have to be reviewed next week by the board. I'm not going to get into a good college. I won't get a good job. By this point the whole class, over 25 people, is watching this intently. The worst part is that they all know I'm lying. We were all very close, so there was no fear of snitching. It was more like everyone chose to indulge and share in my moral shortcomings, and to be honest, that was a nice feeling. Even so, 25 people, who all know I'm bullshitting the hardest anyone ever has, makes it hard to not break character. I'm holding back laughter and working up a cry at the same time, a feat that is damn near impossible. Cue tears. Ma'am, please tell me you're joking. I can't go through this again. I have worked so hard all year to ensure that I do well, that all my work is done, and that I do my parents and teachers proud. UHH. Okay Baba, please don't cry. I'll go check in my office to see if it got left there. She walks out of the room and I finally have a break that allows me to drop the act for a second. Immediately my friends surround me and start asking me what I was thinking. Some praised me for my ability to cry on command, while others said my performance was moving. I was still reeling from the whole thing, but knew that I couldn't give up just yet. When she gets back from her office, I knew she wouldn't have found it. Heck, the book is in my backpack like 6 feet away and completely blank. I prepare for her return by trying not to blink for a minute or two, getting those tears flowing. A few painstaking minutes pass, and I see her walking back. She enters the class, walks up to me, and hands me an empty lab notebook. Along with the empty notebook, she handed me her notes on all the reports, complete with all the diagrams and everything. Okay Advait. I'm really sorry, I seem to have misplaced your notebook. I know you worked hard, and so I'm going to help you out. Take my notes and just copy them into your notebook as they are. Don't worry, I see you're being honest with me, and I know you're a diligent student, so I want to help you get through this. I know at this point I should have been feeling terrible. She had tears streaming down her face, because she thought I might fail because of her. She had prided herself in being responsible, and never having lost a notebook in 16 years, and in one moment I stole that from her. Those really should have been the thoughts going through my mind, but unfortunately, all that was learnt in retrospect. At the time, all I could think was holy anchovy with spoon of guacamole. I can't believe that worked. I was excited to have successfully avoided the mountains of work that follows such blatant lack of responsibility. I ended up submitting my assignment and getting a full grade on it. In looking back, I feel extremely saddened by my actions. I stole a source of pride from my teacher, made her cry in front of the whole class, and cheated on an important part of my education all because I was too afraid to face the consequences. Maybe the fact that I feel bad about my actions means that I'm growing up. On the other hand, I'm still proud of myself for being able to maintain my composure and character in a high pressure situation, so I'm not sure. I had sex with a girl that was about to marry. So there's this girl whom I met since the beginning of college. Let's call her Jane. She was really pretty, but I had a girlfriend at the time, and they were friends. So even after breaking up with my GF, this girl was out of reach, because it usually doesn't turn out well when you try to date your ex's fiends. I was never really close to Jane, just casual small talk every now and then. Halfway through our degree, she did an exchange semester in Spain, and she met a very cool guy, who later became her boyfriend. Time passed by and before last semester of college they announced they were going to marry next year. Everybody's very happy about them. Last semester of college, I shared a class with her, where not so many people attended, and we were the only 2 people in the room who were in the last semester, so we started talking more about graduation, special dates for exams, and related stuff. We became very close in this period of time. She used to share with me details about the wedding, what her plans were, etc. And I'm quite the good listener, so I think she started looking at me as a cool friend with whom she could share things she didn't tell her boyfriend, such as doubts about making the right call, things she liked about him, things she didn't, etc. One day, after the class, she was complaining about not doing anything particularly crazy in her life, and she felt that, after marrying, she wouldn't be able to do crazy things bachelors do. Of course, a big part of it was not having had more boyfriends, not having kissed more people, not becoming crazy at least sometime. I was just listening and telling her I understood. She suddenly stopped whining, looked at me directly in the eye and said, "John, I'll call myself John in this story. Do you think you could kiss me?" My first thought was that she was asking me something very immoral. I knew she was gonna marry, and I had met the guy. I had talked to him, and he was a very cool dude, nice to talk with, smart, etc. I stared at her after she asked me, speechless, but after a while I replied, "Are you sure you want to kiss me?" with a shocked face. J. Yes, I'm sure. Well, I want you to be absolutely sure of what you're asking, because I know girls and I know you can easily regret this. J. I have thought about it thoroughly. Can you kiss me? I thought a kiss was not very immoral. I thought I was only going to help her to do more crazy things before she married. I knew it wouldn't mean anything, I thought, and said yes. What's the worst thing that could happen? Sorry guys, I have to go. I'll continue writing later. So after staring at her for something like 15 seconds, which felt like an eternity, I replied, "Okay, if you're really sure about it, and you're not gonna regret it, I guess we can do it." We proceeded to set up a time and date. It's not like we could do it in public, so we had to arrange it, as weird as it sounds. We met the next day at 3 p.m. inside of a room of the arts department, where art students used to store their old projects and creations, so it was empty most of the time. I should have known about this place earlier. It was way harder than expected. We looked at each other, and we just didn't know how to start. Every other time I had kissed somebody, some extra magic had helped me. I don't know how to explain it, but I had never kissed somebody just for the sake of doing it. There was always a romantic background, and there's this spark that pushes you to go for it. You guys will laugh, but I really feel it so. No spark this time. Just something I had to do. After 10 minutes of random chit-chat she stopped it and said, "Jay, are we going to do it, or what?" Okay. I closed my eyes and went for it. It was a funny feeling, no magic spark, just the empty sensation of some lips touching my mouth. We stopped, and then we went for it again, trying to make it more passionately, although it was a "fake" kind of passion. We did it intermittently for about 10 minutes. She said thanks, and we went out of the building together. I thought that was it, but she asked me to meet in this room the next day, and the day after that one. More and more kissing. We started knowing each other in a kissing way, how we liked it, synchronizing each other, improving, so by the third day I was getting very excited about this new activity. It was an exciting thing to do, because there were no attachments, and we talked very directly about what did and did not liked about our kisses. This was awesome, because it is not something you do very confidently with a romantic partner. You don't want to tell her "I don't like that you use a lot of tongue" or stuff like that, because you don't want to make her feel bad about it, and vice versa. But after the third day, she told me she had had enough, that she had got what she wanted, and that it was over. I felt a bit disappointed, as I was only getting started, but we didn't have any kind of compromise, so I understood. So we went back to being just very good friends for a couple of months. The wedding and our graduation were getting closer. 1 week before our graduation we were requested to go to the place where the party was to take place to rehearse the coming down the stairs thing. When that thing was over, she asked me if I could give her a ride home. There were still several hours before her mother finished her shift at work, so she couldn't pick her up, and public transportation here is not very efficient. I didn't mind, so I did. By this time we were having very nice conversations. We had become very close, and we enjoyed time spent together, so when we reached her place she invited me inside to keep on talking. I did, and after a while the inevitable happened. We started kissing. Remember I told you the first time there was no spark? Well, there was a lot of passion in this kiss. I don't know what it was, maybe that we both thought it was never going to happen again, but had been secretly wanting it since we stopped, or maybe we had already developed feelings for each other. I think it was a little of both. This time we were not at university. This time we were home alone, so nothing stopped us from going further. It was really great. Afterwards she started telling me she regretted not having met me before, and that she would have tried something with me, but I had been the boyfriend of one of her friends, as I said at the beginning, and she would feel bad with her. So it turns out we both had thought about each other in that way, but the same barrier had stopped us, my ex. This happened 4 more times during the next weeks, and it was an awesome experience. I knew what I was doing was wrong. Very wrong. But I blinded myself from the thought of the other guy. Whenever some bad feeling about it came, I forced my mind into thinking she was my girl, not some other guy's. I never saw them together, because the guy was working full time. So that helped. It was all fun and games, until a month before the wedding. I was sitting at home doing pretty much nothing, probably reading Quora, when I received a text from her. Short words. Straight message. Hi, want to tell you something. I did something very wrong, and I regret it. I'm sorry for having involved you in this. I developed feelings for you and I shouldn't, and I'm about to get married with this guy that I adore and love, and blah blah blah. I never want to hear from you again. Hey, but I asked you if you were not going to regret it. I know. I'm sorry. I was wrong. Please respect my wishes. I know you'll understand. So that's how that ended. I had nothing left to say. I wish I could have done or said something, but I knew in which situation I was from the beginning. I should have saw everything coming. Maybe I did, but I decided to go ahead anyways. So my fault. I had been enjoying it a lot, so when it abruptly stopped, it hit me like a rock. But I knew. I always knew. They became married last September, 2016, and they moved to another country. I did never hear from her again, nor she from me. I know she's doing fine. I don't feel bad about it, because it was not my initiative. She proposed it, or that we did it because she wanted. I never forced her to do anything. At the end I was left empty-handed, if I can call it that way. It was such a cool learning experience from me. I had a lot of fun, and it's always nice to have something with a pretty girl. Too bad I was left without what could have been a great friendship, but I guess nice things come with a price. I don't know if this answer fits correctly into this question. I guess I just wanted to tell this story since it happened, but I made a promise to this girl never to tell anybody. And I've been able to keep it until now. So now you Corans know. But I'm trusting that you won't tell her. Had sex with my aunt's ex-boyfriend and her current husband. Funny, I never go anonymous. I already have a notorious reputation on here. But this is way too personal. Yup, my aunt was, and still is a bully. My family is incredibly dysfunctional. My aunt had bullied me, and I believe she did this because she was the youngest in the family and everyone paid attention to her. All of a sudden I was born, and I took that attention away from her. Weird, I know, considering she is 20 years older than I am. Anyways, it's fucked up. When I was 6 to 10 years old she always bullied me. Called me ugly, fat, you name it. Once she took me away from a Christmas sleepover when I was 7 years old and thought I had stolen her iPod. She locked me out the house, and I'll never forgive her for traumatizing my childhood. She also thought me and my cousin, her son, were having an affair. All due to watching Sweet Home Alabama. It's not just that. She's completely screwed up my view on sexuality and men. Making it seem like sexuality was a payment, and power. Men were disposable tools, and other women were competition. Anyways, I grew up to be the sexy beast, and I even knew her ex was waiting until I turned legal. I knew he had fantasies about me. We always went to the beach and I wore my bikini and made sure my huge breasts and curves were prominent, which they were and still are. They finally broke up because he was married and she needed to get married according to society's standards. One night I was bored and asked if he wanted to get a pizza with me when they finally broke up. So we did, and I went back to his place. I've been to his place before, but it was very innocent. We literally had pizza and watched a movie. We got incredibly stoned, and he took a shower and literally came out naked. I tried to show how reluctant I was. But honestly, I was so wet. Not because I was attracted to him. but because it was funny knowing how much I knew he desired and probably thought about banging my brains out while he had sex with my aunt. His reaction when he stuck it in was, "OMG, you're so fucking tight." I love it when I have sex with a man and he's so overwhelmed by how gorgeous and sexy I am. Anyways, I had sex with her husband before and still do. He tells me secrets she doesn't and will never know. He wants to do things to me that he would never want to do to her. And it's so satisfying. Should I get over the past? Well, it's hard to when the woman is still the same way. I know he wanted to marry me, but he told me himself he'd be bored of me quick. It's true, he's boring as shit. My family always imposed I needed to be a good girl and I would never be loved being a bad girl. I grew up with security, too much of it. I always wondered what it would be like being a bad girl. Now all I want to do is immoral and unacceptable shit. The other day I went to a wedding and my extended family was there. I always sensed my cousin had the hots for me. When I go to events I always make sure I know what everyone is wearing, then do a 360. At the wedding every female was wearing a flowy white dress. I wore a tight, hot pink show that showed off my curves and my tattoo. The dress had spaghetti straps, but I wore my bra under it. Yes, I know the bra straps weren't classy, but I liked that I looked good and bad. I still looked classy, but I liked all the attention I got. My cousin kept checking me out, and I saw him checking my ass out. He kept getting all touchy-feely with me. And he's such a good boy, I like that aspect even more, and I would certainly get on my knees for him. It's wrong. Yes, but that's the point. When I was at university in Paris I moved in bohemian circles and the Rascallian princess of that milieu was a young lady I will call S. She actually came from a family of means as evidenced by her apartment in the Latin Quarter where S lived alone, and by her fashion sense. Although she dressed down there was always something chic, nouveau, and expensive that S wore as an accessory. All of which would have been fine, except S had a reputation as a diva who always got her way. Conversely there was C, a lithe former junior Olympic swimmer whose father was CFO at Fordograms. C also attended the university, but did not socialize with anyone. There were various rumors about her. Supposedly she had a wealthy older Spanish boyfriend who lived in Switzerland or Monte Carlo, and who flew her down for weekend stuff of that nature. I really wanted C, but she took absolutely no notice of me. Fortunately, C, S, and I all had one class together, one that due to my love of European history I excelled at. 1/3 of the grade was a term paper that had to be completed using original source materials on a subject chosen by the professor. There were 3 or 4 topics possible, but the student had no say in the matter. We were allowed to collaborate, though, and fortunately I was given one that I was extremely comfortable with. As luck would have it, I overheard C discussing her assignment, the same as mine, and she was not comfortable with the subject matter. I offered to help and she accepted. Coincidentally, S had also been given the same topic, and approached me and asked if I would help her. Now mind you, there was no reason for the 3 of us not to have worked together, but I wanted some alone time with C so I demurred and offered to help. After I finished working with C, I saw a hint of annoyance, but S agreed to wait. C made a couple of dates for us to study together, but no showed each time, so I decided on a different course of action. I let S know I was available to help her, and we made plans to meet at her apartment that Friday evening. A bit later C found me and apologized for missing the last 2 meetings. She asked when I would next be available and told her that same Friday. I then skipped the rendezvous with C and went to the apartment of S where I ended up spending the night. The next morning we made plans to meet back up at her place. Not a lot of studying had been done, and left to go work in the library. A couple of hours into my shift, C showed up and was visibly angry that I had missed our study date. I told her I had been delayed with S, but I would be free that evening. Then came the immortal words I shall remember to my dying day. Well, I'm ready right now. C fumed. So I made my excuses to my boss and left with C to her place. I spent the night and the next morning she drove me back to the library. I honestly believe that C would have dropped me off and that would have been that, but S was waiting there at the entrance. Where were you? S shouted at me and C quickly exited her car and hissed back, he was with me. S stood there dumbfounded and C turned to me and told me she would pick me up after my shift. I moved in with her shortly afterward. A completely immoral plan on my part, but it worked almost to perfection. If you made it this far, you owe it to yourself to subscribe.